I had only been tutoring at this luxury apartment for a few months. The Pinnacle was Manhattan's newest upscale residential tower, a gleaming 40-story monument to wealth that dominated the skyline. From the outside, it was just another impressive high-rise, but the apartments inside rivaled any suburban mansion. I had started tutoring a 9th grade boy there, Noah Wilson, because it was in one of Manhattan's most prestigious neighborhoods, and the building itself was truly remarkable. The residents were mostly from wealthy backgrounds, old money families, and Wall Street executives. I charged Noah's mother, Mrs. Wilson, $2,500 per month for tutoring, thinking I might have asked for too much, but I was surprised when she agreed without any hesitation. I just stared at her in amazement. I had completed my master's in English literature, and Noah was preparing for his advanced placement exams, but he struggled academically. I lived in a modest apartment in Queens, and getting to the Pinnacle required changing subway lines twice. I was hoping to secure a few more tutoring clients in the building to improve my financial situation. This tutoring opportunity came through. My friend Jessica, who taught at Noah's private school. I was incredibly grateful to Jessica because no amount of thanks seemed sufficient. Despite my excellent academic record, I lacked connections and had been unable to secure a teaching position at any of the better schools. In the mornings, I taught at a small English medium charter school, which barely paid me $2,500 per month. My father had passed away, and I was the oldest among my siblings, with 2 younger brothers still in high school. The responsibility of supporting the household had fallen on my shoulders. We received some rental income from 2 small commercial properties my father had left behind, and my mother was skilled at sewing, so neighborhood women would hire her to make clothing alterations. Through these combined efforts, we managed to keep our household running. I was considered quite attractive, which meant that even in casual clothes, my appearance made me stand out. I would go to tutor Noah in the evenings. Everything had been going smoothly for about 2 months, but recently, strange incidents began occurring. Whenever I entered the elevator, 3 or 4 young men would already be inside. They appeared to be residents of the building, but they were incredibly vulgar. Despite their obvious wealth, they projected an affected persona. Gold earrings, shoulder-length hair, with 2 wearing ponytails, 1 with a man bun, and the 4th letting his hair flow freely. They apparently thought they were fashion-forward in their deliberately ripped jeans and oversized designer t-shirts, posing as if they were movie stars. But all I could see was their repulsive behavior. Every time I entered the elevator and the doors closed, these guys would start singing inappropriate rap lyrics, one so explicit that my eyes would fix on the floor, and my ears would burn with embarrassment. I just wanted to reach my destination as quickly as possible so the elevator doors would open and I could escape. What confused me was that whenever I approached the elevator, these 4 young men were always already inside. If it had happened once or twice, I would have considered it a coincidence, but this had been happening regularly for several days now. Noah lived on the 24th floor, so taking the stairs was not an option. Today, when I entered the elevator, one of them stood directly beside me and started humming. I glared at him, but he just smiled and began singing, "Don't look at me like that. I'll hold you close, steal your heart, make you mine." He was fully acting out the lyrics, while the 3 behind him laughed. I somehow contained my anger as I stood there, because at that moment, I was the only woman in the elevator. When his performance finally ended, another one behind me started with even more vulgar lyrics. I quickly moved closer to the elevator door. These guys seemed to be around 21, 22 years old, about my age, but incredibly rude and inappropriate. I repeatedly pressed the button for my floor, even though it was already lit. I just desperately wanted the elevator to stop at any floor so I could exit. Seeing my reaction, the guys burst into laughter. One of them said, "Take it easy, man." The girl looked scared. Another commented, "When you're in an elevator with a beautiful woman, you start wishing the elevator would never open." The third one started singing a line from a popular song about being trapped in an elevator. My patience had reached its limit. I turned around and slapped the guy who was still singing hard across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the entire elevator. All 4 young men stood stunned, staring at me in shock. I said, "If you're so eager to sing, go perform for your sisters at home. That should entertain them." And if you ever behave this inappropriately in my presence again, I'll file a formal complaint." Just then, the elevator reached my floor, and I stepped out. Once outside the elevator, I found it difficult to concentrate on tutoring Noah. My mind kept drifting back to those 4 guys. I somehow managed to complete the 2-hour session. When I was leaving, the elevator contained only the young man I had slapped. The other 3 were nowhere to be seen. He was glaring at me angrily, the imprint of my fingers still visible on his face, my heart filled with an inexplicable sense of foreboding. I placed one foot in the elevator, but immediately withdrew it and waited for the doors to close, planning to let him descend first. Before the doors could close, the young man pressed the button again, causing the elevator to reopen. He said, "Come inside, I need to talk to you." His tone sent chills down my spine. I decided it would be better to take the stairs instead. I didn't want to speak with him. I quickly turned and headed for the stairwell, but he followed me. My heart began to race with fear, so I started descending the stairs rapidly. He called out from behind, saying, "Listen to me just once or you'll regret it later." I ignored him and continued down the stairs. He kept following me. I reached the lobby of the building where a concierge and a security guard were standing. The concierge was speaking with the guard. I rushed over to them and told the guard that this young man was harassing me. Hearing this, the guard gave the young man a stern look and asked, "What's this about? Have you no shame?" The young man approached the guard, hands in his pockets, and said, "Mind your own business unless you want me to remind you of your place. Do you know who my father is?" The concierge, who was responsible for maintaining order in the building, addressed the rude young man. "It would be better if we maintain proper conduct here. Regardless of whose son you are, if you engage in any inappropriate behavior, your father will be notified, so please don't harass this young woman again." After hearing the concierge speak, the young man left, glaring at me as he walked away. I breathed a sigh of relief. The concierge asked what my complaint was, and I explained that 3 or 4 young men had been harassing me in the elevator. He assured me they would look into it. The next day, when I arrived to tutor, the elevator was completely empty. I silently thanked God. But as soon as I entered Noah's apartment, I saw that same young man sitting on the sofa in the living room, engaged in conversation with Noah. His mother was seated there as well. As I entered, the young man looked at me with a strange smile, as if demonstrating that he could appear anywhere he wanted. I lowered my gaze and sat down in the living room, as that's where I usually tutored Noah. His mother said, "Jason, why don't you leave now? Noah needs to study, but do come by this evening. I've made your favorite lasagna." He replied, "Of course, Mrs. Wilson. I'll definitely come, and I'll be visiting more frequently now." With that, he left, but I was genuinely concerned. For a moment, I considered quitting this tutoring job. Something about that young man gave me an uneasy feeling. There was a strange hostility in his eyes. While I didn't show it outwardly, internally, I was beginning to fear him. My constraint was financial, the good money I was earning from this tutoring job. Besides, Noah had started improving significantly in his studies. His mother expressed her satisfaction, saying, "I've tried several tutors for Noah, but he never improved. You really have a way of teaching that clarifies concepts for him. Even his school teachers have started noticing his improvement." I listened to Mrs. Wilson's praise with a distracted mind, as all I could think about were the hostile eyes of that young man, filled with unreadable emotions. On my way back, when I entered the elevator, I was alone. But after descending just 1 floor, the elevator stopped and opened. The same 4 young men entered. Before I could exit, the one named Jason grabbed my arm. I tried to free myself, but during this struggle, the elevator doors closed. I said to him, "What's this rudeness? Let go of my arm." He replied, "I'll show you what rudeness really is. You're quite fond of slapping people and then reporting them, aren't you? Now watch what I do to you." He was still speaking when the elevator lights went out and an alarm began to sound. It seemed the entire building had lost power, and the elevator couldn't function without electricity. Realizing this, I forgot to breathe. I hoped the building's generators would kick in soon and the elevator would restart. But nothing happened. One of the 4 took out his phone and turned on its flashlight. I freed my arm from Jason's grip and moved to the elevator door, beginning to knock on it frantically and calling out, "Help, please, someone turn on the elevator. I need to get out." But I had barely started knocking when two of the young men grabbed my arms, pulled me back against the rear wall of the elevator, and pinned me there. One of them took out a handkerchief and tied my hands behind my back. Another produced some duct tape and placed it over my mouth. Jason, who appeared to be their leader, said, "This elevator won't open until morning, and by then, they'll be removing your corpse from it." My entire body began trembling with fear. I was completely at their mercy. Jason approached me, his face illuminated by the phone's flashlight. He ran his finger down my cheek and said, "You're quite beautiful. It's a shame we have to teach you such a harsh lesson." With that, he slapped me hard across the face, saying, "That's for the slap you gave me." The force of his blow made my head spin. He slapped me again, even harder. The other three were laughing. Then Jason grabbed my face roughly and said, "Now for the real fun." What followed was a nightmare of pain, violation, and humiliation. They took turns assaulting me while the others held me down. At some point, I lost consciousness, whether from the pain, the terror, or simply my mind's desperate attempt to escape the horror. I couldn't tell. When I regained consciousness, I was lying in a hospital bed. I learned later that early morning maintenance workers had found me unconscious in the elevator when power was restored. My clothes were torn, my body bruised, and I had been bleeding. The hospital staff had called the police. A female detective sat beside my bed, gently asking me questions about what had happened. I described everything in detail through my tears, identifying Jason and explaining about the 4 young men who had been harassing me. The detective took notes and promised they would investigate. When my mother arrived at the hospital, her face pale with worry, the detective explained that I had been sexually assaulted. My mother collapsed into a chair sobbing. The detective continued, "Mrs. Walker, I need to be honest with you. The young men your daughter has described come from extremely powerful families. Jason Reynolds' father is one of the most influential real estate developers in the city with connections throughout the legal system. These cases are difficult. The defense will question why your daughter was alone in an elevator at night, what she was wearing, her past relationships. They'll try to destroy her character in court." My mother looked horrified. "And the medical examination? The evidence?" The detective sighed. "It confirms assault, but they'll claim it was consensual. It will be her word against theirs. These families have teams of expensive lawyers. The process will be long, public, and painful." My mother, terrified by what she was hearing, said, "We don't want to file any case. We just want to forget this ever happened." I remained silent, too broken to argue. The aftermath was its own kind of horror. Word spread quickly. The private school where I taught part-time terminated my contract, citing moral concerns and the potential negative publicity. I couldn't return to tutoring at the Pinnacle. Parents of my other tutoring students called to cancel. It seemed the wealthy families were closing ranks, protecting their own. My family faced ostracism too. People in our neighborhood whispered. Some openly suggested I must have asked for it or led them on. My mother stopped receiving sewing orders. My brothers came home with bruised faces after defending my honor in school fights. But I refused to be broken. Though no one would speak up for me, a fire for vengeance began to burn within me. I sold a small piece of property my father had left us, gave most of the money to my mother, and told her I was moving to a different state for a fresh start. In reality, I enrolled in the police academy. If the justice system wouldn't help me, I would become part of it and find my own way to justice. The training was grueling. I pushed myself beyond my physical and mental limits. Every time I wanted to quit, I remembered that elevator, those laughing faces, and I found new strength. I graduated near the top of my class and requested assignment to the sex crimes unit. I wanted to help other women, but I also remained vigilant, tracking the whereabouts of the 4 men who had assaulted me. I learned they had continued their predatory behavior, but their family connections had kept them protected from serious consequences. 3 years passed. I had established myself as a dedicated detective, earning the respect of my colleagues. One night, we received a call about a sexual assault case at a downtown hotel. When I arrived at the scene and began interviewing the victim, her description of her attackers sounded hauntingly familiar. 3 young men had cornered her in the hotel's parking garage. As she described their appearance, I felt a cold certainty settle over me. I requested to lead the investigation and began gathering evidence methodically. Security footage confirmed my suspicions. 3 of my attackers were clearly identifiable. I built an airtight case, working tirelessly to ensure that every procedural detail was perfect, leaving no room for their expensive lawyers to find technical loopholes. When we had enough evidence, I personally led the team that arrested them. They didn't recognize me at first. 3 years had changed me from the frightened tutor to a confident police officer. When I handcuffed the first one, Jason, I leaned in and whispered, "Remember the elevator at the Pinnacle? Remember me?" The color drained from his face as recognition dawned. "This isn't possible," he stammered. I smiled coldly. "Justice always finds a way." The other 2 reacted similarly. When they realized who I was, they were terrified, suddenly understanding that their wealth and connections might not save them this time. As I led them out in handcuffs, I felt a weight lifting from my shoulders. The fear that had lived in my heart for 3 years was finally disappearing. I was no longer that vulnerable young woman. I had transformed my weakness into strength. I had all 3 young men arrested and placed in jail. The charges had been filed against them. Jason's father pulled every string he could, calling in favors from judges and the district attorney's office. But I had built my case meticulously, and with another victim coming forward, one from a similarly wealthy family who refused to be silenced, even their connections were finding it difficult to make the case disappear. 2 days after their arrest, I was assigned to transport the 3 suspects to the county courthouse for their arraignment. I chose a route that passed through a deserted industrial area. About halfway there, I pulled the transport van into an abandoned warehouse lot and stopped. "What's going on?" Jason called from the back. "Why are we stopping?" I didn't answer. Instead, I got out, walked around to the back, and opened the doors. The 3 of them sat there, handcuffed and shackled. "Get out," I ordered. "What? We can't—" I cut Jason off. "Get out now, or I'll add resisting an officer to your charges." Confused, they awkwardly maneuvered themselves out of the van. Standing in the empty lot, they looked around nervously. "Run," I said quietly. "What?" Jason asked. "You heard me. Run. Try to escape." I unholstered my weapon. Understanding dawned on their faces. "You can't do this," the second one said, his voice trembling. "This is murder." "No," I replied. "This is justice, the kind the courts would never give me." I fired a warning shot into the air. "That's to alert any witnesses that prisoners are attempting to escape. Now run." Terrified, they turned and began to awkwardly run, their shackles limiting their movement. I waited until they had gone just far enough, then fired with the precision I had perfected at the academy. 3 shots, 3 bodies falling to the ground. Later, my report would state that they had attempted to overpower me during transport and escape, forcing me to use lethal force. With their history of violence and the evidence of the fresh assault case, few questions were asked. The internal investigation cleared me quickly. The 4th member of the group, Derek, had not been involved in the recent assault. I learned that he had been in a car accident 2 years earlier and was now paralyzed from the waist down. I went to find him one day, discovering that he had become involved with a church ministry and was volunteering at a rehabilitation center. I observed him from a distance as he spoke with patients, his wheelchair a permanent reminder of how life had changed for him. In the center's chapel, I watched as he prayed, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty chapel. "I'm so sorry for what we did to her. I deserve this punishment. Every day in this chair is atonement for the crimes I committed. Please forgive me, though I don't deserve forgiveness." I stood behind him, listening to his confession. I felt no pity for him. The night of the assault, he had shown me no mercy when I begged for help. But as I watched him struggle with his guilt and his disability, I realized that his punishment was perhaps more fitting than what I had delivered to the others. Living with the consequences of his actions every day, trapped in a broken body, Just as he had once trapped me in that elevator, there was a certain justice in it. I left without revealing my presence. I returned to my apartment that night and, for the first time in 3 years, slept peacefully. The nightmares that had plagued me since that night in the elevator finally began to fade. Justice had been served, not through the courts that had failed me, but through my own hands and through the workings of fate. My colleagues noticed the change in me, a new calmness, a weight lifted. "You seem different," my partner commented one day. "Like you finally put something behind you." I just smiled. "Sometimes you have to close one chapter before you can begin the next," I replied. I threw myself into my work with renewed purpose, becoming an advocate for sexual assault victims and working to change the system from within. I knew that what I had done was outside the law, but in a world where money and connections could buy immunity from justice, sometimes the only recourse was to create your own justice. I had no regrets. Each time I helped another victim find her voice, each time I put another predator behind bars through legitimate means, I felt vindicated in my choices. The system might be flawed, but I was working to improve it, even as I had circumvented it for my own case. Years passed. I was promoted, recognized for my dedication to victims advocacy. I established a foundation to provide legal support to assault victims from disadvantaged backgrounds, ensuring they wouldn't face the same barriers to justice that I had. One evening, as I was leaving the precinct, I received a call about a case involving the Reynolds family. Jason's father had died, and in the process of settling his estate, evidence had emerged of a pattern of bribes to public officials to cover up his son's crimes over the years. The scandal was breaking wide open, revealing just how corrupt the system had been. Interviews with other victims were coming to light, women who had been silenced through threats or payoffs. In death, the elder Reynolds was no longer able to protect his family's reputation, and the truth was finally emerging. Sat in my car, listening to the news report about the developing scandal. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that the truth would finally be known, even if justice had come through my own hands rather than the system. I drove to the cemetery where the 3 men were buried. Standing at their graves, I felt no remorse, only a sense of completion. "You thought your money and your connections would protect you," I said to the silent headstones. "You thought you were untouchable, but no one is beyond the reach of justice forever." As I turned to leave, I noticed a figure in a wheelchair by a nearby grave. Derek. He looked up and saw me, and recognition flashed in his eyes. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the cemetery. He knew. I could see it in his face. He knew what I had done to his friends, and he understood why. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of the debt that had been paid. I returned the nod and walked away. That chapter of my life was truly closed now. The nightmares had stopped. The fear was gone. I had reclaimed my power in the most absolute way possible. Was it right? By the standards of law, certainly not. But in the moral calculus of a world where wealth too often shields the guilty from consequences, I had restored a balance that the system could not or would not provide. I returned to my apartment and looked at the woman in the mirror. Strong, confident, unbroken. The scared girl from the elevator was gone, transformed through pain and determination into someone who would never be victimized again. And if there was a price to be paid for the justice I had claimed, I would pay it willingly. Some debts can only be settled in blood. Justice had been served, not through the courts that had failed me, but through my own hands and through the workings of fate. My colleagues noticed the change in me, a new calmness, a weight lifted. "You seem different," my partner commented one day. "Like you finally put something behind you." I just smiled. "Sometimes you have to close one chapter before you can begin the next," I replied. I threw myself into my work with renewed purpose, becoming an advocate for sexual assault victims and working to change the system from within. I knew that what I had done was outside the law, but in a world where money and connections could buy immunity from justice, sometimes the only recourse was to create your own justice. I had no regrets. Each time I helped another victim find her voice, each time I put another predator behind bars through legitimate means, I felt vindicated in my choices. The system might be flawed, but I was working to improve it, even as I had circumvented it for my own case. Years passed. I was promoted, recognized for my dedication to victims advocacy. I established a foundation to provide legal support to assault victims from disadvantaged backgrounds, ensuring they wouldn't face the same barriers to justice that I had. One evening, as I was leaving the precinct, I received a call about a case involving the Reynolds family. Jason's father had died, and in the process of settling his estate, evidence had emerged of a pattern of bribes to public officials to cover up his son's crimes over the years. The scandal was breaking wide open, revealing just how corrupt the system had been. Interviews with other victims were coming to light, women who had been silenced through threats or payoffs. In death, the elder Reynolds was no longer able to protect his family's reputation, and the truth was finally emerging. Sat in my car, listening to the news report about the developing scandal. There was a certain satisfaction in knowing that the truth would finally be known, even if justice had come through my own hands rather than the system. I drove to the cemetery where the 3 men were buried. Standing at their graves, I felt no remorse, only a sense of completion. "You thought your money and your connections would protect you," I said to the silent headstones. "You thought you were untouchable, but no one is beyond the reach of justice forever." As I turned to leave, I noticed a figure in a wheelchair by a nearby grave. Derek. He looked up and saw me, and recognition flashed in his eyes. For a long moment, we stared at each other across the cemetery. He knew. I could see it in his face. He knew what I had done to his friends, and he understood why. He nodded slightly, an acknowledgement of the debt that had been paid. I returned the nod and walked away. That chapter of my life was truly closed now. The nightmares had stopped. The fear was gone. I had reclaimed my power in the most absolute way possible. Was it right? By the standards of law, certainly not. But in the moral calculus of a world where wealth too often shields the guilty from consequences, I had restored a balance that the system could not or would not provide. I returned to my apartment and looked at the woman in the mirror. Strong, confident, unbroken. The scared girl from the elevator was gone, transformed through pain and determination into someone who would never be victimized again. And if there was a price to be paid for the justice I had claimed, I would pay it willingly. Some debts can only be settled in blood,